Well, if you have your Bibles, you can turn to John chapter 6. We're going to be there in just a second as we continue through John. I want to thank David for wrapping up the series last week. You did a wonderful job in moving through John chapter 5. Again, just want to let you know that I continue to deal with anxiety, and so I would just cover your prayers even now as we kind of move into our sermon time. So, many of you know that my youngest son, Caleb, turned 8 a few weeks ago. And, yeah, we can give it up for Caleb. Yep. He's in there. He has no idea. A few weeks prior to that, my wife and I were talking about what we should get Caleb for his birthday. And my mind immediately went to toys. It went to video games, things like that. And then my mind very quickly shifted to all of the toys and video games that we already have in our house. And they just gather over the years, and then many of these things get played with for a few days and then completely forgotten about. So now we have closets full of toys, like collections full of video games, and we just purge from time to time. I began to wonder what we might be able to get Caleb that would last him longer than a day or two. And so I had the brilliant idea of thinking that this would be a fantastic time to redo his room. Now, Caleb is our youngest, and admittedly, he's in the children's ministry, so I can talk about him. He's our baby, like he's just spoiled, and his room is kind of the same thing. He had kind of like a baby room, like not like a little kid room, right? And so I'm kind of going, this might be a good time to redo his room, all right? This will be something that will last him for a while, get rid of a lot of little kid stuff, bring his room up to date a little bit. And Caleb is a huge fan of The Legend of Zelda, which again, if you're older, that's a video game. And so we decided to turn his room into his Zelda-themed room. And it's been pretty fun. So my wife is a doer, so immediately after that, she went online and started like researching and buying and going onto Etsy and all these things. And one of the things that she found on Etsy was this wooden fixture that has to do with the Legend of Zelda, and it was going to be $65. And I'm like, $65? I thought to myself, I could build that for way cheaper, and immediately I regret saying that because my wife was like, okay, well, you can build it then, and I'm like, oh, crap, what did I do? I'm not really a handyman, but I can figure things out. So I found myself not too shortly after that at JP Lumber, going to pick out the supplies and figuring out what in the world I was going to do. I mean, it was like a triangle, so I'm figuring out angles, and my mind is hurting even just thinking about it now. But one of the things that crossed my mind as I was in JP Lumber was going, like, I don't know really how much I have to buy, of what I have to buy, but whatever I have to buy, I'm going to make sure that I don't have to come back. So I would rather buy too much and not have to come back and just have all of this stuff at my house than not buy enough and have to make another trip back to JP Lumber. In fact, as I'm checking out, my neighbor across the street works at JP Lumber, and he's like, well, why are you buying this much stain for something that's big? I'm like, I'm not coming back here, buddy. Sorry. I'm buying what I want. So he's going, this is way too much stain for what you're building. I'm going, I just want to make sure that I have enough to come back, or have enough so I don't have to come back here. And I hate the thought of not having enough of something. Again, even when it comes to feeding people, like if I'm making, like the thought of running out of food, like, ooh, that's a terrible thought for me. So I just want to try to, if I can, connect this to where we're heading today. And we're going to be at least beginning with this word enough. Enough. Now, very quickly, when we talk about the word enough, I just want us to kind of briefly think about this. Enough simply means to have or to do as much of something as is required. So to be able to meet a need, whether by doing or having. And if I'm just going to be completely honest with you, like one of the things that has been important to me and to us as a church is this idea of just kind of being unashamedly authentic. And there's been a large portion of my Christian life where I've just felt like I'm not doing enough. There's more that I need to be doing. There are many times when I've felt like I'm not doing all that is required of me, and so it's led me to think things just specifically in regard to my Christian life, my ministry, and what I do, and I kind of go, am I doing enough? Am I just in regard to, like, you can't escape these things. Am I a good enough person? Like, am I like, I'm a seasoned believer now. Am I behaving good enough? And am I preaching good enough? And am I a good enough pastor? And these are words. I want you to see that word enough. like the ability to bring all that is needed to a task. And the truth is that there's many times that these questions lead me to this inner dialogue and just kind of lead me to kind of like these dark places of kind of going, no, I stink. I'm not enough. I'm not a good pastor. I'm not a good enough person. I'm not doing enough. Enough. Not having or doing all that is required. I wonder if you can relate to this at all. This idea of just feeling completely inadequate when it comes to your Christian life, the church, or something like that. Forget everyday stuff. Forget like all the normal stuff. Let's boil this down to like our spiritual lives as we sometimes like to talk about it. I wonder if you feel just inadequate in living the Christian life. I wonder if you feel inadequate. Maybe you're seasoned believers kind of going, I don't feel like I have enough to be able to do what I think God has called me to do, or I'm not even doing all the things that God has called me to do. Like, have you felt this before? Do you just kind of feel like there's this moving target and you can never quite hit it? Now, our text for this morning, as we move into John chapter 6, we're going to encounter a situation where a need comes up and the disciples are completely inadequate to be able to take care of the need. They can't take care of it at all. And it is a moment where the disciples of Jesus do not have enough. They do not have the ability to take care of the problem that lies right before them. And in this moment, this is so cool. There's through this, what is going to end up being an incredible miracle. Jesus is going to teach them something that they would never forget. In fact, the event that we're going to see take place in our story today would leave such an impression on those who were there that it became seared into their mind. In fact, this miracle that we're going to see today is the only miracle that is recorded in all four of the Gospels, short of the resurrection. It's the only miracle that is included in all four of the Gospels. So when they thought back many years later on the life of Jesus and the things that they have experienced, everybody was telling this story. People like Luke who are researching it are saying, hey, Luke, you got to include this. John, who was a firsthand witness, or a firsthand account, he recounts this story. It's a story that came up every single time as the disciples meet their own inadequacy, and we see how Jesus responds to it. In John chapter 6, we want to watch for two things. We want to watch for the inadequacy of the disciples and how they respond to it. And then we want to see the response of Jesus in the midst of their own inadequacy. Make sense? So we want to take this idea of I can't do enough, I can't be enough, I'm not adequate enough, I don't have what it takes, into the text with us today. Starting in John chapter 6, verse 1, it says this. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. So stopping on verse 1, we're moving now from Jerusalem to Galilee. Jerusalem is all the way down here. Galilee is not a city, but Galilee is a region. See? Now, the Sea of Galilee is that little sea to the west of Galilee. Do you see it all the way up there? So I want to give you a visual idea of what's happening. We're moving from Jerusalem all the way back up to Galilee, specifically to the Sea of Galilee. And so this is a lake where many, many people made their living as fishermen. There was something like 30 fishing villages on this lake alone. I mean, it had its own local economy of its own based on this lake. Now, as an aside here, just if you're kind of if you like to pay attention to big things and big themes and symbolism, or if you're a note taker, you can begin to write down this idea of food and water, because we're going to see it come up in this whole chapter. Food and water. And here's what you need to know as we move into it, is that in Israel's history, the stories that involve food and water are always attached to faith stories. There's always a faith lesson to be learned when it comes to food and water. Think about manna and quail, right? This trusting of Jesus. Think about the parting of the Red Sea, the water that was parted, and the Israelites had to have faith. I want you to see, again, as we move into John chapter 6, food and water is going to come up a whole bunch, and it is always tied to this idea of faith or trust in Jesus. And it's going to come back to our story today. Now it says this, that Jesus went to the other side of the Lake of Galilee. So zooming into the lake, this is a like a modern day visual of the lake. You can see, or you get a better idea of what the lake looked like. And the traditional site of the story that's going to take place today is all the way up there where it says Bethsaida Julius. Do you see that up there? So this is where presumably people think that the story took place, in that northeast corner of the lake. And so what we think happened is Jesus, somewhere over on the west side of the lake, takes a boat across the lake to over there to Bethsaida Julius, okay? Now, just to be fully transparent, some people think that he took a boat from Tiberias somewhere over to the wilderness over there. I'm convinced that it is where the traditional site is, and we'll see why here in a second. We'll definitely see why here in a second. So Jesus takes a boat across the lake, and the reason why he does it is to have some alone time with his disciples. He's very, very popular. As we'll begin to see, people are following him from everywhere, and he's going, I got to get away, if for no other reason, just to have some alone time with my disciples. So he takes a boat across the lake. He parks his boat, and he very quickly realizes that his alone time is going to be short-lived. The text continues, and it says this. It says, and a large crowd was following him, which is a weird thing to think about, because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. In other words, he's healing people. People are seeing this, and he has a crowd of people following him. Then it says, Jesus went up on the mountain. It's a very hilly region over there. And it says, there he sat down with his disciples. Okay? So John doesn't record every miracle that Jesus does. So up until this point, Jesus is healing people along the way. And as he's healing people along the way, many people are coming and following him. And so as they come to follow him, they see Jesus get into the boat, and they're going, where's he going? They know that if Jesus gets on a boat, he's going to have to end up somewhere else on the lake, presumably on the other side of it. Maybe they could even see him from the shore. So what they do is they follow him along the shore. Zooming up closely, let's assume that he kind of travels from somewhere over here. He takes a boat across, maybe staying close to the coast, and he's got a crowd of people following him along the shore. And as he moves along the shore, more and more people come to follow Jesus as word of what's happening. They're going like, what is happening? I mean, there's not a ton of people here. So if there's crowds and crowds of people moving across the coastline, they're kind of going like, what is going on here? And they begin to follow for no other reason than pure curiosity. Like, what's happening here? So they're following Jesus across the coastline, and eventually maybe Jesus has a moment or two of alone with his disciples, but very quickly the crowds catch up to him, okay? And there's probably, again, a deal of people kind of like having no idea what's happening. Now, then the text says that Jesus went up onto a mountain. And again, if you're a note taker, a symbolism type of person, then you need to know that Jesus going up on a mountain is not by accident. When Jesus preaches his most famous sermon, what does he do? It's called the Sermon on the Mount. He goes up on a mountain. Now, in the Old Testament, in the history of Israel, the mountains are where people went to meet God. Think of Moses going up on Mount Sinai to get the law. Mountains are where God was, right? And so when Jesus goes up onto this mountain, he does it for two reasons. One, his voice is going to project further. He can see the people he's teaching, but also he's communicating his own authority to the people. And there's even maybe a little bit of a divinity claim here. I am God. So Jesus chooses this mountain. He goes up. It's no accident. He sees who he's talking to, and then John throws this little tidbit in. Again, this is just the history to kind of get us prepared for what's happening. John is a very intentional writer. He's very smart. So when he adds something, he does it on purpose, all right? And in verse 4, it says, now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Again, more background stuff. You're going to know that the Passover is mentioned 3 times in the book of John. We saw it already in John chapter 2 when he was in the temple, and Jesus is alluding to the fact that he's going to be the Passover lamb. Do you remember this? When maybe you do, maybe you don't, okay? You can go back and watch it online. Now, this is the second time now we are going to see John mention the Passover, and it's kind of weird. And the reason why is it seems like this little mention of the Passover is forced, like it doesn't need to be here. But John includes it for a reason. Now, during the Passover, and here's why, Okay? During the Passover, they ate a meal which was called the Seder meal. Okay? This was a meal that they ate to remember how God delivered them from Egypt. And sometimes when they would get together, the Seder meal, part of it included unleavened bread. Throughout John chapter 6, we're going to see bread come up over and over again, okay? And so when John mentions the Passover here, we're going to see a correlation again now between Jesus and this Seder meal. Eventually he's going to say, I am the bread of life. In a few weeks, we'll talk about that. But we're going to see this connection with bread even in our story today. So when he mentions Passover, this is the reason why. Bread, the Seder meal. Jesus is going to be the bread of life, as we're going to end up seeing, okay? So this is what's happening in the background. And part of, again, this meal was unleavened bread, which we'll see is going to have significance in our story today and the rest of the chapter. In the next verse, we're going to see this tension develop. And we're going to be coming back to this whole idea of inadequacy, not being enough, not having enough. And here's the tension that develops in verse 5, where John writes this. He says, lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread? That's a weird thing to ask. So that these people may eat. Now, remember how I told you that this miracle is the only miracle to be included in all 4 of the Gospels? In Mark's Gospel, we're told that Jesus had already spent a lengthy time teaching them. And presumably it had come to the end of the day. And so Jesus had this compassion on them, and he felt this kind of responsibility for them. He's going, I'm teaching them, now it's my responsibility to feed them. But there's a large number of people there, as we're going to see. Now, what I want you to notice, and this is important, is that Jesus doesn't immediately fix the problem by himself. He doesn't immediately rectify the problem. Instead, in the midst of this problem, what does he do? He turns to his disciple, Philip, and he asks him a question. Where are we to buy bread so these people may eat? And John does this with great intention, or Jesus does this with great intention. And he tells us a bit why in the next verse, which is just a weird thing to think about. The next verse, it says this. He said this to test him. Weird. For why? Because Jesus already knew what was going to happen. Jesus already knew what he was going to do, and yet he asked the question of Philip anyway to test him. So John is saying that Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen, but rather than just doing it, he takes the opportunity, and this is important, to grow the faith of his disciples, to grow the trust of his disciples. It says that Jesus asked him to test him. So what is the test here? The test wasn't to see if Philip could figure out how to feed everybody. Okay? Very quickly, we're going to see that this is going to be an impossibility. This was a test of the faith of Philip, the trust of Philip. Philip, in the middle of this unsolvable problem that you cannot solve, how are you going to respond? Jesus knew this, that in our moments of inadequacy, these moments can become growth moments for our faith. Listen, faith is not, again, a Star Wars word. May the 4th was yesterday, okay? It is not this nebulous word, okay? Faith is trust. So when we see here this idea of our moments of inadequacy leading to moments of growth of faith, we're saying growth of trust. I trust Jesus more in whatever situation my life ends up in. So our moments of inadequacy lead to, or can be potentially, if we let them, they won't become automatically, moments of growth in our faith. So our moments of inadequacy have enormous potential to grow our faith in a way that moments of feeling like we can take care of it cannot. Jesus knows this, so he asks him the question, where are we going to buy food, Philip? Okay. Now, here's another thing to keep in mind. As we move into this story, you need to know that Jesus hasn't done a miracle like this yet. He has been healing people He's been turning water into wine, doing things like that. There hasn't been this large-scale miracle happen yet. And so when this question comes up of what are you going to do, Jesus knows what he's going to do. He knows he's going to do this miracle. But Philip and Andrew, as we're going to see, they have no idea. They had never seen this before, so their faith had never, wasn't fueled by something they had seen Jesus do before, okay? Nothing on this scale. So his test for Philip was to see how much trust that they had in him, or he had in him, based on their current understanding of who he was. And then Jesus was going to blow their mind and enlarge their thinking and their understanding of who he was. So the test was, where are you going to look when you have this problem that you cannot solve? Who are you going to look to? Are you going to look to yourself? In Philip's own ability, he had absolutely no way of providing food for this people. He could not do enough. He was not up to the task. He was not up to to feeding all of these people. So where does Philip look in the middle of his own inadequacy, of him not having enough? This is how John describes what happens next. It says, Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread wouldn't be enough for each of them even to get a little bit. Okay. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a boy here with five barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many? So Philip's, his mind immediately goes to the question at hand, where are we going to get food? And he's going, Jesus, even if we were to find enough food, 200 denarii, or 8 months' wages, wouldn't even be enough to give everybody just a tiny little bite, okay? So he's doing the math in his head as all this is happening, and Jesus is kind of going, all right, how long is it going to take for you to get there, Philip? He didn't quite get there. So he comes to the conclusion that this isn't going to happen. Enter Andrew, who immediately starts, he's going, okay, man, I know I can solve this problem. Let's see what everybody's brought. He goes, Jesus, I got a guy, he's got 5 pieces of bread and 2 fish. What can we do with this? Now, in the text, this is funny, the smallness of what Andrew finds here is emphasized. Not only that, he says barley loaves. Barley loaves was the food of the poor. This is what poor people ate. And then the fish here, again, in the Greek, think sardines. Think opening up a can of sardines and pulling one of those stinky things out. I mean, they are not big. This is what the text is leading us to visualize here. The smallness of what is happening here. So, not for a moment, in their inadequacy, did Philip or Andrew consider who was with them. Isn't that wild to think about? Not for a moment did they go, oh, Jesus, I see what you're doing here. This is a test. Now do your thing. No, they're going, we don't have the money. We don't have the resources. We got five pieces of bread, 2 fish. Their mind doesn't go there at all. For Philip, and maybe I can relate to this like wholeheartedly, as we begin to cast stones at Philip and Andrew, this is me. Oh, I'm scum of the earth. Like, I can't do this. Like, I'm a terrible person. I have this ministry task. I'm still struggling with, Jesus, I still have panic attacks and blah, blah. I can't do this. This is us. And here's what's like, their answer is we don't have enough to complete the task. And here's what's cool. In the middle of their dejection and in the middle of their inadequacy, Jesus takes over. And the story continues like this. It says, Jesus said, have the people sit down. And again, here's one of these little phrases here that like an eyewitness would have known, right? And it kind of lends to the fact that this did take place during Passover because there's grass during this time of the year. It says, Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in this place. So now we're introduced to the size of the crowd, which we kind of knew, but now we're going to get a number. When the men sat down, there was 5,000 in number. They counted men. They didn't count women and children, so people think upward between 10 and 20,000 people. 10 being conservative, 20 being kind of, an overestimation. So somewhere in between that range, there's a large number of people. Then it says, Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to all who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. Mark, in his gospel, tells us that Jesus had everybody sit down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Okay? Again, only a detail that an eyewitness would be able to tell us. Again, the grass is green. This is real. This is happening. The number of men, again, 5,000, could have been 20,000. The crowd is enormous. They're all sitting at the base of the mountain or up on the hill listening to Jesus talk. And Jesus proceeds to have the people seated as he prepares the meal for the people. Then it says that Jesus takes the bread and he gives thanks. Now, here's an aside. This is, as preachers, from time to time, we can go on like our little like pet peeves. You're going to get one from me now. So like, I kind of like go, when people get together and they're like, you order Taco Bell and you're like, oh, we got to pray before a meal. You're like, bless this Taco Bell for the nourishment of our bodies and, these prayers that we pray. And it's like, what are we doing here? Only one time in Scripture does Jesus bless the food. This is at the Last Supper. I researched it because I was like, what's going on here? I want to know. When people get together and they bless the meal, here's what they do, or here's what we see in Scripture. They say thank you to God for it, and then they bless God. There's an aside. So when you get together and pray and somebody's going, and bless this Taco Bell for the nourishment of my body, you can kind of go, well, we can thank God for it and then bless God. But anyway, all right. Back to where we were. Jesus takes the bread, he gives thanks, and now he begins to, you can just let your mind's imagination run away with this, okay? He begins to pass out the bread to these large groups of people. Come on, thousands of people, starting with this small amount of food. Like, my immediate response is how in the world is this happening? Like, as he tears the bread, does more grow back? Is there just a large abundance of bread that is pouring up out of the ground? Like, how does this work? The short answer is we don't know, which is kind of adds a little bit to the mystery to it, and you can kind of wonder. And there's like this mystery of this miracle involved as Jesus breaks the bread and he passes it out and he says, okay, go distribute this to all the groups, okay? One of the things I wrote down here is like, you know how like you break off the leg of a starfish and it grows back? I wonder if that's what happened to the bread. I don't know. Okay. However it happened, we don't know. But however it happened, John stresses the fact that people ate the bread and the fish until they couldn't eat anymore, until they had their fill. Continuing on in verse 12, it says this. And when they had eaten their fill, everybody's full. Remember, 8 months' salary isn't going to be enough to even give one person a bite. Everybody's eating to their full, bread, fish. He tells his disciples, go gather up the leftover fragments so that nothing may be lost. Wild. There's leftovers? I love leftovers, by the way. So they gathered them up and filled the 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. So not only did everybody get a bite, they ate till they were full, and then there were leftovers. And again, nothing is an accident here. Okay, how many baskets were left over? 12. So scholars are thinking the 12 leftover baskets, meaning God has either enough to supply for the 12 tribes of Israel, or God or Jesus has enough to supply for his 12 disciples. Point is Jesus is able to meet the needs of those who follow him. But more than that, we want to see this. In the middle of his disciples' inability to provide. I don't have enough. I can't do. 8 months' salary. We got five blows here and 2 fish. That ain't enough. Okay? Jesus provides in abundance. Who are you looking to? Who are you looking to in the middle of your inadequacy? Are you looking to yourself, forgetting all the while who is with you? The temptation here will be to only think of this story in terms of the physical. In other words, if I'm hungry and I have a physical problem, God can meet my needs, and God certainly cares about our physical needs. God supplies them in abundance, especially to people like us who live in America. And he often works miracles to provide for us physically. But here's what here's what I want you to see. That the lesson here in this feeding of the 5,000 and really through the rest of the chapter isn't primarily a physical lesson, it is a spiritual lesson. Okay? And it begins with the gospel. And the gospel reveals to us our own inadequacy, that we cannot do enough, that we can never meet the standard that God has for us. It is an impossibility. You can't do enough, Paul says. There is no one righteous, no one who meets the standard of God, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. Does all include you? Yes. They have become worthless. There's no one who does. I can't. What Paul is going through great lengths to show us is our own inadequacy to meet the standards of God. We cannot do it. We don't have the ability to do it. Even the best person on earth isn't even doing good. There's no one who's righteous. Paul goes out of his way to show us our own spiritual inadequacy, that because of this we deserve death. Okay? Our inadequacies. Now, stay with me here. Now, if you're like visiting church for the first time in a while, and you're kind of like, maybe you were dragged here, and you've been mired down in these feelings of guilt and shame. Oh, I need to go to church so that God will do this, blah blah blah. And you constantly feel like you're on this religious hamster wheel of trying to earn and do more and do more. Listen, you are constantly going to feel inadequate. You are constantly going to feel like you cannot measure up, and God did this intentionally so that it would lead you to the end of yourself. And when you come to the end of yourself, that you wouldn't look to yourself to continue to try that cycle all over again, but that instead you would look to the one who is with you, Jesus, who has done for you what you could never do for yourself. In Romans 8, Paul says this, and I'm winding down. He says, what the law was powerless to do because it was weakened by the flesh. We cannot obey the laws of God because our flesh is weakened. We have the desire to do sinful things. What we couldn't do, God did by sending his own his son in the likeness of sinful flesh to be a sin offering. And so he condemned sin in the flesh so that, and pay attention here, the righteous requirement of the law might be fully met. Jesus is enough to fully meet every spiritual need that you have, to make you righteous in him when you could never make yourself righteous. Your inadequacy is meant to lead you to despair so that you would look to the one who is fully adequate to meet every spiritual need that you have. Jesus did for us what the law was powerless to do because of our own weakness, in order that the law, the righteous requirements of the law might be fully met in us. In the midst of our own spiritual bankruptcy, Jesus supplies abundantly all that we could ever need. He is enough. Yes. Jesus is enough. You are not enough. And this is the gospel, that in our own inability, God does for us what is impossible for us to do for ourselves because he loves us so much. It is simply a question of faith. Who will you look to in your moments? Will you look to yourself? I'll do better this time. I'll go to church more. I'll read the Bible more. I'll do more. I'll sin less. I'll be better. I'll help a homeless person. Like, all that stuff is great, but it will never earn you righteousness. You will continue to fail. In those moments of inadequacy, would you look to the one who provides abundantly for you in Jesus? So, remember now, in the midst of Philip and Andrew's problem, Jesus asks them, how are you going to provide for all the people? And so that's the question today. How are you going to provide for your righteousness? And it's a trick question because he can't. And Jesus is waiting for you to look at him and go, oh, I understand. You're going to provide. And watch a miracle happen. So when Jesus is around, the impossible becomes possible. In your moments of failure, in your moments of inadequacy, when you feel like you can't do enough, I'm not living this life right. I'm not doing enough ministry. I'm not preaching good enough. Whatever, that's me. Would you look to Jesus and go, oh, thank God that Jesus is enough, because I'm not. Thank God that Jesus is enough. This morning it's my hope that when we are haunted by these feelings of inadequacy, that we would look to the one who is with us, Jesus, who's fully capable to provide for all that we could ever need, to the one who's able to feed the 5,000 with next to nothing, to the one who conquered death, to the one who is able to do abundantly more than we could ever ask or imagine. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this text. It is just a stark reminder of the beauty of our own inability to do what you've called us to do. We can't do it, Lord. Father, the best part about that is we can turn to you and find freedom and rest. Oh, Jesus, you have this. You've got this, Jesus. Father, I pray that if there are people in here who are just constantly feeling inadequate, may they turn to you. Father, I pray for those of us who've been believers for a while, and we're bogged down by these feelings of not doing enough. May we just be reminded that you are enough. Jesus, we come and we worship you now because of who you are for us and what you have done for us. Thank you. We pray this in his name. Amen. We're going to sing a song here that we've only sung one time.